Good morning. My name is Ann Brown. I'm the treasurer of the governing board for the rec centers of Sun City West, and I want to welcome you to the Budget and Finance Committee meeting on Tuesday, the 17th of May. We have a quorum present today with one member, Anita DeGumbia, who is not with us. She is, I think, doing something fun in the Midwest right now, so probably water skiing. Yes, thank you, Gary. We do have a quorum, as I said, and Kathy Lindell is going to be our secretary today, our rotating secretary. I would like to ask for review of the minutes from our most recent meeting, which was April 19th. Those have been distributed. Are there any changes, additions, corrections? Hearing none, have consensus to accept the minutes as written. Thank you very much. And I believe Dick Rhodes was our secretary for that. Is that correct? Thank you, Dick, for that. The first order of business today is an update on CapTrust from our CFO, Pete Finelli.
Thanks, Ann. Good morning, committee members. Thank you again for participating with this. Very much appreciate it. Many of you met the two gentlemen that come up for our presentations from CapTrust. You probably recognize them, but the one that speaks more on the business aspect is Frank Piles, and the one that speaks a little more to the investment advisements is Nathan Erickson. I think they've done a fabulous job. Frank Piles alerted me about 2 weeks ago that he has a business of his own that requires him to commit full time to, so he is departing CapTrust. I very much enjoy working with him, but I've also met many times with Nathan Erickson, who is going to assume the role of the liaison, and of course he will continue to present at future CapTrust requested presentations that are, generally speaking, done quarterly. At this juncture, though, we don't have any more scheduled until September. So any questions on that? I think we'll be fine. But.
I did want to make a comment. I was on the group that did the RFP last year for a new financial advisor, and while it's always you always look at the face of the organization that you review, and Frank was the face of CapTrust. We also went into it knowing that they did have the depth within their organization to provide us with the services we need. And as Pete said, Nathan really is the one who is running the investment arm of it. So I think we're in good hands there, and they do have a very well-rounded staff should anything happen to Nathan, which we hope isn't the case. So, and I do want to remind all of you today, if you have questions to ask, please use your microphone. We're getting comments that the information is not getting picked up by people in our audience. So next we will have a review of the April 2022 financials and the capital update from Pete Finelli. Thank you, Pete.
Thank you again. Before we go there, Mike, if we could take a quick peek at the, I've mentioned in the past that this is a little bit difficult to read, but I do kind of think, if you mind, I'd like to highlight just a couple items. Up here, and this is only going to year to date at this juncture, you'll see these variances within my presentation, but essentially for the revenue stream, on the operating, $1.7 million ahead, and expenses are $125 behind or above, if you will. So the component I want to highlight, I guess, is that this is the vast majority, almost 90%, is emerging on what we would classically title discretionary. The golf fees are, no member is required to play golf. Nobody has to go to the sports pavilion to bowl. Nobody has to go to any special events. Nobody has to spend on range balls and cart rentals. So I think it's important to note that a lot of this is generated off of the the allure, if you will, of emerging from COVID, or the condition of our courses, the prices that we offer, the times that are availability. I think these are very important things that a lot of our overall budget, and against prior year when of course COVID had some impact, but just wanted to highlight that. Expenses, the 321,000 got some discussion in terms of FTEs, and I think Cliff in his budget presentation alluded to some of that variance, but the 321,000 on 12.3 million is about 2.5% variance, which generally speaking is well within a bandwidth of an organization as diverse as us. In the landscape maintenance, of course, about 300,000 of that is generated off of the seed, and continuing the phosphorus chemicals are continuing to manifest themselves, and as is occurring in supplies where the oil for our fuel for our fleets, both golf and for our maintenance, are definitely having an impact. So if you now we'll go back to the general presentation. I won't repeat a lot of these, but this is the current month. We did see the beneficial against budget in prior year that's been happening in all of these categories. So overall, 250,000 favorable variance in the revenues against budget. So excellent performance there again. Expenses were very well maintained, a 3% overall variance. Again, the culprits of supplies and landscape maintenance is where we're getting hit by some of the global inflationary impacts. So overall margin, 200 favorable on the revenues against 52. So just about 200,000 favorable variance input. So a good month. Moving to year to date, again, I won't highlight these. I mentioned them a lot earlier. $1.7 million up on revenues. The same thing I mentioned on expenses, within about a 1% overall expense bandwidth. And so overall year-to-date margins, $1.7 million up on revs, down about 100 grand, and then so 1.6 favorable variance, which by policy directs towards the reserve funds at the end of the year. So you'll see in a second that we're getting hit in some of the other areas, so this is very beneficial to the association. I brought this slide up with Cliff's help last month. Nice to see another month added. The 5-second version is that blue line, or the gray line above it is our actual operating margin. The red line is our budget margin, and so any gap in between is essentially favorable variance, and that continued through April. So a little bit of the impact to the downside. Speaking of CapTrust, first of all, on the positive side, it's very strong APF continuance, one of our highest months ever for April. So almost 200,000 favorable infusion into the reserve funds. Most of you are wise, and that's why you're on, with finances, and that's why you're on the BNF committee. I don't think I'm surprising any of you that, just as Frank and Nathan alluded to, historic reductions of both the equities and the bond portfolios in the month of, or last 4 months, but it continued in April. So we did record just over a $1.1 million deficit to the, or valuation change to the reserve funds in the month of April. So tale of two tales, I guess. APFs and operating are doing well. In recent times, the reserve funds have taken some impact. Year to date, the APFs have been about a $1.2 million excess, and I'm going to present a slide here in a sec as part of our educational series to take a deeper dive into various aspects of the income statement. Through the 10 months, almost $3 million of unrealized losses have been recorded. And so almost a 1.9 million deduction, if you will, for the capital related component year to date. So briefly, again, I mentioned we're going to try and just do a deeper dive on a statistic, an item of the income statement, you guys could ask us if you want to make any particular requests in the future. We thought that there's been a lot of discussion about APFs. And 2 points that I kind of want to make. The red line is the actuals for the last 10 years. And then in the last 2 years, I think there's a lot of factors that may be going into it, but the last 2 years we're showing just outstanding APF activity, reflecting in my opinion, a very strong interest in the community, good value, low interest rates until recently. People maybe selling out their equity either in the state already or from other states and are flocking here. So a lot of good things. There was actually just under 50 transactions that have been benefited in the current year from the Hovanian development. So So what does the green line represent? The green line is our budget for next year. And I do believe that the three factors that we communicated in our budget presentation, elevated interest rates, they're now double what they were in the last 6 months. The high prices that could stymie future purchases or new buyers, and just relatively low inventory at any given time. So that's where we essentially drove the 1,200 for practical modeling. We believe it's to look at more of a longer term, run rate, and that's where you can see that the 8 years leading up to the last two is where historically we've been. So, any questions on APFs? Just John.
Thank you, Pete. I've just tried to do some quick calculations against this, and I'm looking for affirmation or a correction here. If I heard you correctly, you indicated that the 1591, the sales year-to-date or units, included 50 for the new development, which won't repeat.
Correct.
Dropping that down, I get a number of 1541, which is a little higher than last year, but again, those 2 years going together and the housing boom make perfect sense to me. Do we have any idea how many additional units are out there that will come in on a one-time basis and would probably come in next year into that, and how much of that surge, if you will, that we got, which is kind of a one-time surge, and then it's over. It won't repeat.
I have to honestly answer
Does
that. I'm
anybody
not aware
know?
of any more developments. So.
Is it finished? Is it sold out at 50? Okay, so the one-time effect, we've got it. It's in the bank. Over. Okay, thank you.
Oh, sure.
Can I follow? I want to follow up on John's. Is that okay? So he said it's a one-time, but let's say 30 years from now, those homes start selling off. Do we get APF fees
Sure.
back for those?
Okay.
I just wanted to correct.
I could go into policy, but yeah.
Not corrected.
If you're in the home less than a year, you're going to automatically. If you stay within a year and then move within the walls, then you're going to get your APF waived.
Okay.
But there will be a new
Thank you.
APF paid. Yeah. So I hope this helps a little bit. Just to give you Ann.
Pete, have we talked to anyone recently? Are we seeing a slowdown yet? I mean, I realize that it takes a while for real estate. It's a little bit lagging as interest rates are going up, and I know we have a large majority of people, I've been told, who come in here and don't have a mortgage. But are we seeing any lagging yet with
Inquiries?
home sales going down?
No, almost the opposite. Every general manager's meeting, Riley gives an update as he oversees membership, and the understanding I have is through 15 days, I think we were in the low 90s and double that, if you will, that's 180 run rate, and that's well above the norms. So inquiries is another one that we look at. That's going to indicate slowdown, and there is as strong as ever.
Thank you.
So then lastly, the overall, taking the operating and the capital related component together. So we did have a downtick of almost 733,000 in the month of April, mostly due to the valuation change. And year to date, operating margin $1.6 million, capital rated down to 1.9, and so a negative 300 against the budget with 2 months to go. And I'll speak a little bit more to the impact that these items have within the reserve funds in a second. With any questions on any of this? If not, I'll move to the capital. So capital, you all know this, presented this every month, 5.7 million budget capital purchase orders. Overall, we've issued about 5.2 million, 4.8 of that has been on the current year. We closed out a few more items. 1.3 million of purchase orders have been executed, paid for, and added to the fixed asset system. Upon that, there's been about 116,000 realized savings. We have 10 items that at this juncture are looking more and more like they're going to be encumbered. But that's a pretty low number of items out of probably 150 that the governing board approves. Quick update on our allowances. I think we added a few more dollars into the CC&R renovation. That falls under the changing demographics. With 2 months to go, we do have about 87,000 remaining of our 395 allowance. And John, with your keen eye, I updated this slide to bring this is what is presented within the budget. The line that I, generally speaking, bring most people's attention to is at the bottom at 56%, and then that's what we're projecting to exit out of the current year, and we started at 58. And so this is a slide I think needs to be amplified and communicated to owner members, in that a lot of people focus on various sectors of this, but they all go to the end game with the same weight. A dollar favorable could be offset by something negative, so we always have to keep that in mind. So I mentioned 58% is where we started the year. Again, that's a highly, there's a lot of factors that go into that, so that's the measurement that we had at the time. We're 1.6 ahead on the operating. Investment looks like they'll earn about 110,000 more than what we budgeted, primarily because of higher bond yields. And the APFs, as we just talked about, are through 10 months very, very favorable. Closed POs of 116, 87 on the allowances. All of these have been defined, but you just got to remember that we weather and we have a long-term outlook, but the valuation change of the reserve funds essentially wipes out almost all of the items up above, at least as far as in the current year. Doesn't mean we're going to have those type of valuation changes any given time. Again, the CapTrust folks mentioned this is somewhat historic type valuation changes on both the equities and the bonds. That doesn't happen very often. But since they do offset each other, our projection off of that modeling that I just mentioned was to be at 56%. Any questions on the capital portion? So, and that's all I had. I believe Cliff will be up for the budget.
Are there any other questions on the financial statement presentation or the capital update?
I do have a question.
Yes, Richard.
Can you please remind me what changing demographics is?
Changing demographics.
Yes,
Sure.
we have a line item there. It was 75,000, as
Yes,
I recall, and now it's 194,000.
Talking to Pete.
Oh, sorry.
Yes, the general, I mean, we all know what the word allowance is. It's for unexpected. The overage that you're referencing was brought forward with specific facts and findings using the allowance that clearly we've had year to date. That was communicated within the facts and findings. It was unanimously approved in, I believe it was February, and actually for those that haven't been over, the work is well underway, and we are retitling that, I believe, to unexpected and expenditures next year to kind of get away from that question that has been posed to me since the day I got here. So it's a good question, but generally speaking, it's for unanticipated expenditures.
It's been a confusing term to all of us. So I'm glad you're changing it. Just a
Yeah.
moment. Dick, did you
Absolutely.
have a question?
Thank you.
Kathy, yes.
Yeah, Pete, you've heard me talk about this before, but I'm looking at the 5-year, budget out there. And if you look at the APF rate, we just raised it, $300? And to show that it's raising again, and I know these are projections, but I liken it to ticket prices. You're not going to raise those ticket prices every single year. If anything, it might be every other year or every third year. And I think we need to have a little more reality in there because we're going to have to hold those for a while instead of just keep increasing or we'll lose our competitiveness. So just a thought, and that would be the same comment, and I know you mentioned it on the roofs for me. If you look at 2024, 25, a little over $1 million the year before, 900,000 or 9,000. If that can be evened out and spread, we'll have better investment return as well.
Boy, there's a lot there.
Yeah. Well, those are just comments.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't think you need to respond.
Let's go to
to
the good news first. We have really good news in terms of our competitors directly around us. We're of the understanding that, and this was communicated earlier, that Sun City has elevated their APF rate to 4,000. So this year's proposed increase would only put us on a par with them. The very interesting and beneficial news is that Sun City Grand's board has approved an APF rate not to $3,500, not to $4,000, not $4,500, $5,000. So I believe that's going to position us well for competitiveness. And with that as our backdrop, I do believe that those increases may be, it's a slow-moving animal, but I do believe a modest increase like that would be warranted, especially, quite bluntly, against the backdrop of the inflationary impact right now. Our modeling for FFB increases is 3%, and historically it's been at 2% over the last 4, 5, 6 years. You get too many years of this 8% hike, and that 50 million, just like that, could turn into 53 million and 54 million. And I'm glad we are having this opportunity because we hear a lot about that, and people kind of talk about what the reserve fund is, but it's equally important to see what the numerator, I should say. The denominator, the FFB actual dollars could increase by millions on inflation, and the reserve funds, if they're not moving with it, you're going to fall behind real fast. So your second one, roofs. I would only highlight that to Carl. He made this presentation. I can't remember the forum, but I believe it was at a governing board level, where he communicated the efficacy of the warranties and keeping ahead of roof maintenance. When you do that, you extend and avoid the real expense of gutting out a roof and then having to disable the whole building for an extended period of time. It's very pricey.
Yeah,
so.
I'm not arguing that at all. I'm just saying if you're in the preventive game, then you could smooth it out more because you're moving ahead of the
Fair enough.
schedule, and that would help that's all I'm
Sure,
saying.
fair enough.
I might tag on to Kathy's mention about the APFs raising. You know, that might be something to take a look at next year when we go to do the budget, though. If they are staying strong, we may be able to even budget for a few more than we have been doing and leave it at the 4,000 for a year or two. Now, I agree that the comment that's been made in the past, this doesn't affect our current residents unless they're buying more than one property for investments. It affects those coming in. But in the past, we've usually kept it at a level pace for a couple of years, this year being different. But anyway, just a comment. John?
Thank you. This may require just a simple yes, no question. The water usage and actions might be taken by the state has gotten quite a bit of news play in the general press in the last month or two. Have we learned anything or anything come our way from official sources that would play on the irrigation line of this capital expense and maybe cause us to have to be more aggressive about turf removal and irrigation? That would be a factor here. And if the answer is no, we don't have any, that's fine. I'm always trying to look a little bit ahead on things such as capital.
I believe we're very well positioned against some of the other communities because of what we are, I believe it's called contiguous nature of our courses. When that was approved, so to speak, by the Department of Water Resources, we then had to evaluate our deturfing component, not on one particular course, but against what the needs would be for 7. And it's my understanding that a relatively modest amount of deturfing would be sanctioned to get us to the level we need to be, and it's a pretty low number, and that works very well for us.
Thank you.
Oh, I'm sorry. Pete, good morning. Thank you. This is going to be a really dumb question for me. But in the current month, April, I look at membership variance or this year versus the prior year. Is that due to the turnover of homes as new people applying for our membership at that point? Because realistically, when I look at our community being, and I don't want to say closed community, but being pretty much static in the amount of members that come in here, are we going to show this variance as positive in April and then maybe next year in October show as a negative because people are moving from month to month?
No, on all fronts, and it's a good question. So what most people don't know, and you're not alone, George, they view membership and they think of only the dues. The reality is actually there's 9 or more lines within membership. The answer to your question is actually that the growth year over year it was March of last year when guests were re-permitted in. We generate several $100,000 a year just on that component alone. I was brought up at our general manager meeting that the tenants activity, even as late as May this year, is very strong. We're seeing the re-emergence from COVID where the people were able to do tenants. Also in there is transfer fees. When you do the transfer fee of any inquiry for an APF, we're generating a relatively small amount on an individual transaction, but aggregate on several hundred more APF transactions, and you can see quickly that all of those are adding up. Quite bluntly, the membership dues are pretty stable year over year.
Thank you, Pete. It was just a question. I know when we get these summaries, the banner that we have in there have multiple layers underneath it, and thank you for putting it out there.
Yeah, hi, Pete. Thanks. This is very good information. I appreciate it. I have 2 things. One of which is, and I don't know if you know the answer to this. Do we have any idea what percentage of the homes are cash as opposed to other type of financial arrangement?
I don't, but
Okay.
general comments is that it's becoming higher,
It's becoming what?
a higher number.
Yeah,
yes.
that's right. So that kind of leads me to the next thing, and that's on the APF. My sense is, and this is kind of a theme that we've talked about here, is that our APF should be competitive. You know, and if we need to look at those around us that we believe, or that the homeowners will believe that we're competing with, and that's where we need to be. I mean, if we could target something. So 4,000 is the range. I think 4,000 should be the range. If it's 5,000, then I think we should do 5,000. But so there's not a lot of science in it. I think it's really more of a value. We don't want to be so low that, you know, we're considered lowball and nobody's going to want to come here because we're not. And I know this is not a very good analogy, but still, I think that thought does cross people's mind about, well, how good is it really if they're only charging $2,500? You know, what are they keeping up? So, but anyway, that's really more editorial and just kind of food for thought for later on.
A quick question for you, okay? I think the fees, the asset preservation fees, that's all dependent upon the market. And in the real estate, we're in a highly competitive market right now. I mean, I know on my street, one home is sold 3 times. And each time it's been sold, the price has gone up. So when it comes to competitiveness, I'm not sure if someone comes in here to buy something, they're going to be looking at the asset preservation fee they have to put in. If we're paying in all cash, I see homes in my neighborhood going for $500,000, and they're coming in with cash. I don't think they would blink at $4,000 in asset preservation. So I guess my question is, well, we talk about competitiveness, the market here would say that we have an opportunity. So should we raise the fees to $4,000 instead of, I mean, it still would keep us competitive, maybe go over that number and generate more money. I mean, right now, as I said, in the real estate market, I'm not seeing people blink. As an example, I had one neighbor, they purchased their home at $410,000. 7 months later, they sold it for $475,000. I don't think someone would hesitate at paying an extra $500 for an asset preservation fee.
Richard, you said something about going to 4,000. That's what we will be going to the first.
Oh, I'm sorry, going higher than 4,000.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for clarifying.
We make our proposal and the governing board sets the approval of it. Those are all valid considerations and let them decide.
One other question, Pete. I'm looking at the projection, and I know it's only a projection. We see the second of the huge Gulf irrigation coming up in 24-25. Have we, I'm sure Cliff and your people have gone in there, are we adjusting that dollar amount up as the cost of materials is increasing quickly?
Yes and no. It's
That's
always
that's good, Pete.
Yeah, it's always a consideration. I had this question asked when I was at our forum. Are we actually needing to move future prices of all 7 courses reflective of some of the current prices? Answer 1 is we don't operate that way when, as I said, the inflation is elevated for a relatively narrow bandwidth. We do not unilaterally just go in and adjust our future funding inflation percent just on that narrow a basis. On the more positive side, the person was asking, and this kind of correlates back to one of you guys asked about, I think it was John that asked about the courses, whether our water usage was going to be adequate. The best news is that the elevated cost of Grandview occurred predominantly against our reserve study modeling. It predominantly occurred in the deturfing area. That proved to be quite a bit more pricey for the irrigation, the stones, the granite, if you will, all the shrubbery and cactus and trees and everything. Those proved to be quite a bit more pricey than we anticipated. Going back to John's point, we don't have a lot of deturfing needs in our current modeling for the ADWR requirements. So I don't have to go in and be highly concerned about that deturfing component just being a reserve steady buster, if you will, for lack of a better word.
Yes, Gary?
People forget how expensive it is to maintain the system. When you play and you see some of these holes that are dug and the number of people that are messing around with the system trying to make it work, the first thing I think about is all the things that aren't being done that they could be doing if we had a decent functioning system. You go back to when the R.H. Johnson pool debate was taking place and we wanted to spend $2.5 million repairing a dead issue, but $4 million got us what we got today. It's a heck of an investment. And this kind of I assume it's Pebblebrook we're talking about, the $3 million?
The second course or
Yes.
the one upcoming?
No, the second. I know it's Grandview first.
I believe Pebblebrook is
Pebblebrook's
correct.
the second one. And again, that was $2.2 million 4 years ago. So it's slightly higher than it was, but you'll never know what the cost is.
Right.
And an organization as thin as we are, spending more time fixing them than doing what they ought to do it's money well spent.
Gentlemen, I'm just going to jump in. I think that the second course is Echo Mesa.
Echo, could be
Then
Echo.
Pebblebrook,
Yeah.
and then Stardust. I think those were the four in that order. And the only reason I'm saying that the amount of dollars that are being allocated look like an executive course as opposed to a regulation one.
I think you're right, George, sorry.
And
Great comments from everyone. Yes.
I'd like to recommend that we approve by consensus the April and first send it off to the governing board.
Do I have consensus?
Yes.
Okay. They are accepted and will be taken to the governing board. Thank you very much, George. Next up is our accounting manager, Cliff Swan, who is going to give us updates on the 22-23 operational and capital budgets.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Just want to give a quick update here of, the capital and operating budget. We're closing in on May 26th, which will be the presentment and approval process with the governing board. Want to take some time today, just kind of review where we're at. Also inserted some slides about the membership increase, some historical information, and some inflation information. So let's get right into it. I always like to start off with the budget goals. They're really the foundation for how we build our budget, and it's these goals are why we're at where we are today with the community that we have and the product that we offer. So again, primary goal is to preserve, protect, and enhance the assets of the association. A lot of the things that we do were discussed here today with roofs and golf courses and the like. So, that's the primary goal of this budget. We also want to make sure our reserve fund is adequate. And, that we have to look into the future for that. We can't just look what's right in front of us. We have to really plan for that. And, there are times are good sometimes and times are not so good. So we have to look at that. We can't, jump to a knee-jerk reaction when inflation's coming in at 8.3%, or if it's, negative 1%, which I believe in 2019, 2020 it was. So anyway, we have to look, we have to plan, and we have to, look at things historically to do that. Also, there's a lot of talk about master planning, and part of the master plan project, a huge part of that is, what are we going to invest to stay competitive in the market and to, give services and facilities back to the community, because that's all part of it as well. And then, again, talking about a little bit, Gary touched on a little bit about maintaining the standards that we have, and how do we do that? What's the best way to do that? Invest in a capital repair to make sure that that team of maintenance workers is out there, working on things that enhance and keep the standards of the association. So again, this is the foundation to our budget, and I like to continuously drive that home because it really is important, especially when we talk about, what we offer here. No changes here on the financial statement. Again, forecasting a $1.4 million inflow into our reserve fund, and highlighting the areas that are impacted most, and 10% increase in salaries, wages, and benefits. That's an investment. It really is. It's an investment in our biggest asset, which is our people. 63% of our overall expense is attributable to salaries, wages, and budget and benefits. So we really have to do that again to maintain, to preserve what we have here. All right, let's talk about dues now. So I wanted to provide a chart here showing what our dues increases, the dollar amount increase, have been for the last 20 plus years. You can see here there's 2 years where it was $0. There was 1 year where it was $39, and then this year we're proposing a $28 increase. But just wanted to show what that looked like compared to historical dues increases, just to give some context. And then taking this, the dues increases, and laying on top of that the inflation rate. So, I think the key takeaway from this slide is that, as our inflation rate rises and falls, our dues increases do the same for the most part.
Quick question here, Cliff. So
Yes.
You've got the two graphs up there. One's for inflation, the other one's the dues increase.
Yes.
So is there a correlation? I mean, as I look at this, are we raising dues higher than the rate of inflation?
Well, I'll get to that slide next, which actually shows the rates together. But and I think that'll answer your question. But this slide specifically is just to show the actual increase year over year, and comparing that to the actual inflation rate, and showing that as the inflation rate drops, the fee increase over the prior year generally drops, and as the inflation rate increases, the fee increases higher over prior year.
Okay.
So let's go to the next slide. So this is the actual dues percent change year over year with the inflation rate. So to answer your question, historically, our dues increase percentage is higher than our inflation rate, except for the last 2 years where it's been lower. And again, this is April. This is 8.3%. We won't finish up at 8.3%, but I don't think we will, at least. But this chart, I believe, is what you were asking, Richard.
Yes, I was just wondering, why is it that the dues have been exceeding the rates of inflation? I mean, it would seem to me that if we're exceeding the rate of inflation by dues that are higher, then we have more revenue, so therefore there should be added expenditures, added value to this. So, I mean, I see here from 2000 to 2023, there has only been maybe 2 years where we didn't increase dues. So the question I ask is, why is it higher than the rate of inflation?
Yeah, it's they're not dollar for dollar comparisons, of course, but what I'll say is that they haven't been for the last 2 years, this year or the requested budget. So I can't answer really that question specifically, other than if you look at the trends make sense in terms of the rise and fall of each.
I would,
Yes,
I
ma'am.
would almost think we would have to go back and look at those particular years and see if there were things that we were doing capital-wise that required us to have more. I don't know. I've only been here since 2011. And so those years in the early 2000s where the dues change was much higher than inflation, it would be very hard for me to even guess what that would have been without going back and looking at actually what was going on in our community.
I can be in agreement, but I'm looking at like 2020 during the COVID, we're still higher than the inflationary rates. No, yes. So I guess if I was having the community stand in front of me saying, why are you increasing the rates higher than the rate of inflation, particularly in a period when people probably weren't using it, I would like to have an answer for them, a rational answer that says this is why we did it. And right now we're asking to increase the dues again. And so I guess my question is, like, selling it to the community, why are we increasing it to those rates?
You do realize we did not have an increase last year,
Right. I realize
despite
that.
what inflation was.
Right.
And I think it's pretty hard to gauge with 2020 because it's
It's
gonna be
a
an
weird
anom-
year. I mean,
It's going to be an anomaly in the books for a long time. But that's just editorial comments. John, did you want to say something?
One question and two suggestions, Cliff. This is good. Okay. First one, are you using the CPI for inflation?
Yes.
Okay. And then what might make the graph a little more telling is it jumps up from 2021 there. It bypasses the skipped year. If you had a 0 in there as another data point, I think it would.
Oh, I got you. Yeah.
The year you skipped, especially in color, it would show up. Our black and white copies here don't depict that quite as well. The second thing is, if I were going to go on a search and destroy mission looking for a very good question, because I think the community would benefit from the more transparent, the more information we can provide to the owner members, the better we're serving. So I would look for new services and new things that we are doing that maybe have significant costs. I'm thinking back to the credit card usage on memberships. It's a simple thing we do.
Yeah.
It helps, it's convenient for the members, but there's a cost there that wasn't there before. There are probably any number of enhancements in the golf world and in those things that just kind of get lost.
Yeah.
Because they're one here, one there. They get lost. But I mean, if either we're paying the people a lot more and accelerating their pay because of the labor market, and you don't get any more work out of them.
Right.
It's just labor is more expensive, and then there's new services. I'd be looking in nooks and crannies there, and if you could find some of those, I think everybody would be better served. And it's not a criticism at all.
Sure.
It's just a helpful suggestion, I hope.
Thank you. Gary?
I guess it begins and ends for me with a 40-plus year community and the kind of things that have to be done to maintain the standards that we've grown to accept and expect. I was surprised at the workshop last week when Cliff presented this. Not a comment was made. It was kind of understood that the world is going crazy and we got to follow the lead to get things done. And I would hasten to mention that when 20 people show up for the general manager's presentation of this budget, you have either two things: a community that doesn't care or one that has the confidence that people are doing the right thing, and I would opt for the second.
Yeah, thank you, Gary. And also what to consider is the industry that we're in. We're in the service industry, and, the service industry is hit hardest it has been hit hardest when you look at inflation and the cost of your people cost, and then, you know, petroleum-based products, all these repairs and maintenance, the subcontract work, all that stuff, all of those services are usually hit harder during inflationary times.
Cliff, I want to ask a question, and I'm not sure if you've been here long enough to answer this, and it's a bit awkward, but what I'm really interested in is, what was the premise of the discussion last year when we had this about raising dues or not raising dues? Was there anything that would be remarkable or that was convincing, you know, short of the fact that we came up with a decision that no increase was necessary? But I'm sure there was some smoke in the room about that discussion as well. So can you shed any light on that for me?
I was not here. I've heard some discussions, but it'd probably be better for Pete to talk about those things. And so I'll defer to him.
A confluence of a lot of items. The status, if you will, of our reserve funds and a percentage was, in my mind, one of the driving forces of long-term modeling. It's why I try to spend considerable amount of time communicating, you know, how that is functioning. Dues are, you know, probably 60% of our revenues. There's no question it's the backbone. When the evaluation of, you know, the impact that COVID had upon, you know, the membership, especially for, you know, some of the government required closures and everything, I believe that when we evaluated the, and George mentioned it, you know, about what is in membership, you forget that there are tremendous other components that are going into membership revenues. I mentioned guest fees and tenant cards and transfer fees. At the time, we thought that the impact of the closures would be probably, so to speak, the wrong time to be going after an increase for dues. The inflation was still relatively modest at that time. And quite bluntly, we were starting to merge. This was March of 2021 when the guest prohibitions were lifted. And we lost, as I mentioned earlier, several $100,000. Special events had no dollars. Tenant cards were virtually non-existent. We were getting a sizable belief that those sources of revenues would restore themselves, and the impact that had on the people in the community would be well served to not put a price increase on the dues at that time.
I actually appreciate your honesty on that, and I guess in the back of my mind, what I was thinking, and this is purely hypothetical, is that if there was discussion that maybe there should have been a $5 raise or a $10 raise, but given the special circumstances and given the times, the decision was made, no, that's the wrong thing to do, hoping that we would be able to sum back up this year. And so my sense, that's exactly what I thought was happening. So you've really satisfied my mind on that, and it kind of tells me that this raise is actually could possibly be considered trying to supplement what we've missed in the past. Is that a fair statement?
No.
No? Okay.
I really believe that.
Okay.
And I think Gary was alluding to it, and quite bluntly, I thought this committee was extremely supportive of investing in our staff next year. We are behind the 8 ball. There are communications of how many positions are open, the difficulty that you see nationwide. We're not in a some kind of bubble here where we're exempt from that. And we need to invest in our staff to retain and recruit. And absent that, I believe some impacts that are not going to be pleasant could be felt. And that's not an absolute, but I think we risk that. This board, this committee, I mean, heard that, and I believe they were supportive of the decision. That is a vast chunk of the support for this increase. Commitment in our community. And item number 2 is inflation. Cliff alluded to it. We've got golf courses. The impact in fertilizers, seed, are not some imaginary that might happen. They're front and center. Oil for our they have to be funded or we're going to fall behind. And that's we believe that. And going to Richard's point, we're actually kind of proud. Maybe we're not saying it loud enough. We're proud of the last 2 years that inflation has had impact upon our organization. And yet we managed it through other sources, try to make our amenities competitive on price in terms of quality. And we're seeing that in discretionary spend, and I think that should be celebrated. And dues, this is below the inflation rate. It's investing in our community, and that's why we propose it.
Thank you.
Any other comments?
Yeah, I just would make, I support this totally. When I worked in higher ed, frequently we found ourselves with the same kind of discussion compared to the CPI. And what we had to do was to adjust it to higher ed CPI, or, inflation rate there, which is really what's happening here. 63% of the budget is employees. And so I think it's misleading, to be honest, this way, because you do get down into this kind of discussion. So the inflation is in employees, and at least 10 million of our budget usually goes to capital projects, which is another huge increase in materials, labor, supplies, which we know. And then the comment that we're in a service industry is right on as well. So I think we need to figure out how to kind of wrap that in. If higher ed were to compare themselves to the CPI, they'd never raise tuition, which is probably a good thing, but but you had to look at it a little bit differently.
And I know my general manager's up at the phone, but I just want to also reiterate too, we're looking at increase in dues. One of the things that our general manager did, looking at the budget that we're currently in this year, was to look and go to his staff and make sure that they were not over budgeted, they were on target, and they made sure, and he came back with a minimum of 3% reduction of expenses with the current budget that we're in right now. And I want to make sure that the committee and anyone who's listening realizes that our general manager has done, of course with Pete, can't leave Pete out, a great job in also not only asking about revenue, but when you talk about revenue, there's also the expense side. And the expense side, when you look at an inflation rate of 8 or 9% that's out there, currently, the work that they did last year, the due diligence of looking for a 3% reduction has come back, and it really marries the numbers up very correctly. Thank you. I know my general manager's up on. Thanks, Bill.
Other comments?
I just have one last one, not to flog the dead horse here, but I look at this, and I think the comments made regarding the index would be telling in here for all the service-related things. But just looking at it as is, I don't see a problem with it. I think this community is extremely well managed from a financial point of view. I think we're very, very lucky that we always seem to have one eye on the dollars flying out of here. And I look at this and I don't get any angst at all out of it as written, and I think a different index would make it even a better, more compelling story.
Thank you, Ann, and good morning. Sitting in the back listening, I appreciate your comment, Richard, and just sitting back there thinking what passed by in 2020 that may have made a difference. And I think one of the big slides that we typically show during our forums, or whether we're talking to the Torch Academy and just trying to explain how we operate, you all touched on it, right? We are a very, very large organization, service-oriented, and the vast majority of our budget is related to our staff. And then the second largest piece of that pie are our utilities. With all of the square footage that we have, the aquatic facilities, and all of the, living here in Arizona, air conditioning is expensive, but running golf pumps dwarfs that. Most of you don't manage golf courses in your backyard, so you don't really know how often and frequent and the size of those pumps that we move water. But that's very, very, very expensive. But again, golf revenue comes in to kind of save the day as far as that goes. But those are the expenses really by and large that take up everything that we do. And that really kind of speaks loud for us. Secondly, in 2020, we inherited a completely new department within our operation here when we took over the operation of CC&Rs. So that added a whole nother fleet of people per se, both part-time and full-time to our organization. But in doing so, we enhanced our management per se of the properties here with a program called REDS, where we communicate directly with Maricopa County now. That wasn't happening then. So a lot of sales and transfers that were taking place, we were missing. So inheriting that division and implementing that REDS program basically turns that into almost a positive for us. And so that was very, very good, but it does show up in our overall expenditures. So those are the two things. Just sitting back here, I mean, we'll go back and we can cut through that and kind of see what else really kind of what was employed then that may have jumped that particular budget. But that's kind of where we're at. And as we sit here today, I mean, we're looking at down the road and the governing board to make a favorable recommendation to approve this situation. As far as the annual budget goes, we're hoping to get a favorable recommendation again from the B&F committee today to kind of move that along. But I am, as are you. I mean, you see the news every day, and you go grocery store shopping, and you go buy whatever you buy. Things are more expensive today than they were months ago. Look at a plane ticket. Look at the price of eggs, the price of milk. Everybody's feeling it. I got an email yesterday telling my cell phone just went up $1.35 a month for every line that I own. So those expenses are going up. We're very sensitive to the amount of dues that we're representing here. Yeah, $28 a month, $28 annual, $8 a month is an impact. But can we survive without it? I mean, I'm not going to say no. There's some spending within that budget that could it be postponed? Certainly. But we still walk down the trail very proudly, like Mr. Finelli talks about. We are a premier adult retirement community. We want to make sure those standards are maintained. And that hence is the reason why we do what we do. It's unfortunate that our insurance costs, based on the amount of employees that we have jumped. Again, we faced that last year. There's a lot of incidents that do happen around the world that insurance companies have to pay out on, and that unfortunately gets directed back to us in the form of dues. Things we have no control over, whether it be forest fires, whether it be mass shootings, whether those types of things, whether they happen in Arizona or anywhere else in this country, affect us. And so the 20% bump in those with another 15% bump coming, those all play into how we get to the bottom line as far as what we're really proposing. So those are some of the things, again, on this operating side of the budget that I just wanted to make sure we all know and touch on moving forward. But anyway, appreciate all your support, and any questions, I'd be happy to help answer. Thank you.
Thanks, Bill. Okay, so, thanks for all the engagement, by the way, on that last slide, those last couple of slides. I think I've got a couple good takeaways from there. I'll try to come up with that kind of service industry. I'll do some research on that. but you know, a big purpose or a big, you know, my intention behind putting those slides in there is to get this communication and engagement going with this committee, because I think the community really benefits from it. And you know, the slides that we've inserted into Pete's presentation and the feedback that I get from you, and we go back and create this stuff, I think it's great for the community. So thank you for engaging in that. And then speaking of engagement, you know, I put this slide together because I really do want the community to understand, this committee, all the committees, that this budget has been a culmination and a collaboration. I'm just talking about the operating piece. You know, it started on January 12th when the sports pavilion got together and started talking about some of the challenges that we were going to face. And the presentation that was, or the results that came out of that was, you know, an increase for bowling rates. And, you know, we've had basically 12 public engagements since January on this budget. All throughout that timeline, we've taken feedback, we've gone back, you know, discussed it, generated slides to help communicate and engage, and you know, just really, you know, get the community engaged and involved. And Gary touched on it a little bit earlier. I believe that, you know, this is the first time I've gone through this process, and I've really enjoyed it, and I really enjoy this format, you know, where we get to talk to the community and talk to you, and you know, you all leave here and people come and ask you questions, and it's just it's a great way to really get the, you know, community involved. So, you know, I put this slide in there just to show all those different touch points. I know it's a little busy, but yeah, no, it's been a great process, I feel. So, okay, so, you know, to this point with this presentation, we've done all of our public presentations required on the budget. All the public forums and the committees, this has all been presented. Now we've had the over 100,000 approved by the governing board on April 28th, and then at this point we'll move this forward to the governing board with your recommendation for a vote on May 26th. Any questions or comments?
Cliff, I just want to thank you, and I think if we look at this next to last slide that shows, I believe we're the 13th time that this has been presented in public, I don't think anyone can say that we're not transparent with what we're doing, because it has been open. Gary took the words out of my mouth with the budget forums. People either don't want to speak up or they feel like we're on the right track. And when you have so few people come out to those things, come to this meeting, come to the governing board meetings, I think we must be doing some things right. That doesn't mean we're going to please everyone. We're not bacon, but I do think that we are not bacon or avocados.
It smells good. It tastes good. I mean, what's wrong with bacon?
You're right. But we are being very open with this, and I applaud Cliff and Pete for both listening as comments have been made, and this committee has just been dynamite this year. You all have not sat back and just said, yeah, whatever, but you've spoken up and you have really given good feedback, and you've been critical at times, but I think you've been very good in your comments. And I'm going to call on Mr. Schwind, who has his hand raised.
Please don't run.
But to touch on what you were talking about regarding these engagements, and Mr. Bozak was talking about the 20 or so folks that attended the forums. the hardworking gentleman in the back of the room, making sure this is available to any and all on YouTube. When it comes to the forums and those types of things, as far as our budget, we've got 399 hits. So, I mean, what they do in providing that information to our owner members is a very positive thing. And so any kind of feedback that you were getting or we're getting or the governing board's getting is all good stuff. And the fact that many people are actually paying attention to that, I think, is a very good sign. Thank you. Sorry.
Okay, thank you.
Next up on our agenda, CFO Pete Finelli is going to give us an end-of-the-year presentation on the 100,000 and plus capital projects.
So I thank you. A little bit of background, real briefly. The capital budget, we all know, is a governing board is presented, and then they approve the items. Many of you know this, but if you're not familiar with it, we don't require by our own policies that by June 30th, all of these projects have to be completed. Our policies allow us to encumber an approval over, and that's why the capital funds have a line item within the modeling for how much was carried over. We actually have that as part of our annual fund transfer between the operating and the reserve fund. So just to highlight that some of these items are going to encumber over and will, and there's still a small amount of unknown on a few of these projects. So what I did was take the budget presentation a year ago for any of the items over 100 grand and inserted an actual / projected and then effectively either a savings or an excess. And for the first item, one of the more material ones is, I can't remember the exact amount, but I believe 50 or so vehicles and golf maintenance equipment. We still actually, with the supply chain, I don't know how many of you know this, but we issued POs on all 50 or so maintenance items back in July. I'm not sure any of them arrived until November. They're still trickling in, one or two here or there. One we did benefit was some of the mowers proved to be, they were, again, it comes back to, I think Gary was saying, we're always evaluating the need, and the governing board approved amount for mowers was blank amount, and our golf maintenance guys went and said, no, I think we can actually go with the model. And I think 5 or so of them were about 10,000 less. We're doing that. I think you got a lot of conscientious people doing that all the time. One of the biggest items has this encumbrance that I was talking about. So first of all, it's not a transparency thing, but last year the budget for these 3 items on the far left here, design, pump station, and mainline, were approved for $865 aggregate dollars, but we never approved any individual line item. And so I talked with Todd, Patty, and this is how we broke it out as far as how we wanted to proceed with these 3 items. Good news on virtually all fronts. The design work was put out for an RFQ. Gary Brawley was awarded the contract, and to date, there's been about $5,000 less expended than we anticipated. Pump stations, especially with some of the supply chain, we were quite concerned about that, but a $380,000 allowance. The 280 is what we actually got for a bid price, and we're moved forward with nice savings there. The main line is probably the most favorable of all, or at least goes back to, again, consideration for your dollars as owner members. The main line could have been done. There was a way of bringing that line in parallel to the existing line, but the deployment costs for you hear this from Carl all the time, the deployment cost to doing a project is one of the bigger costs that these entities involve. So we started to evaluate that, going back to the word encumbering, we're going to encumber this $305,000 over because according to the contractor that we're proposing to use for the Grandview project, they don't have to enlist a lot of the mainline component if they can make it as part of the broader project. And so we're thinking this is not locked in one direction or the other, but we're believing that 300,000 will likely be less because we're engaging it as part of the broader project come next April. Carl does a lot of seal and stripes, and sometimes the mill and replacements are the ones that get the capital dollars. Kuntz was on the docket for this next year, or for this last year. I believe, just again for transparency, the project was unearthed, so to speak, scraping away all the old asphalt, and when they did a test of the soils, it happened to also occur right when there was rains, and so they discovered that would be a $60,000 or $70,000 soil stabilization cost to get it done, so to speak, in amplified time, or you could let nature do its course and let it dry out over, I believe, a 2-week period of time. And, I think that decision was brought forward to committees or the governing board, and I believe the decision was made to save the dollar. So that's why there always is some allowance within any budget for stabilization items, because they happen with considerable frequency. But good savings on this project as well, almost 45,000. The greenhouse, Carl's just finishing this project up. This was one where the supply chain did nip us in the bud. The greenhouse, when he bid it out, or when Carl anticipated 300,000, the actual greenhouse itself had about a $20,000 price change between the point of the approval and the actual PO executions. Labor costs are also impacted into the labor and materials into the bids that came out of the contractor. So slight overage on that one. Trail Ridge had its one of its lake shores be proposed to be done with the split face block wall. I think it looks great. Came in relatively close to budget. This one is where I was talking about. This one has not even had anything beyond some prep work and some tree removals, but at this juncture we have gotten the bid from the contractor, barring any change orders, barring any permit fees that we aren't anticipating, or it should be very close to budget. And that's very good, because this is the area these contractor prices for renovations have been the biggest Achilles heels in the current year. And there's the one I wanted to highlight was, the build out of environmental services building over by the social hall, desperately needed for the 20 or so landscaping and environmental service staff. You can see what it looked like before. This, of course, got front and center attention due to the price change. It went to a facts and findings and got unanimous approval. I think Carl gave an update that the framing is done. The roof materials are waiting to arrive, and he's anticipating completion in about a month and a half. So it's looking really good. It's going to be very helpful. Mm-hmm.
Excuse me, I just wanted to interject here. First of all, I walked this place last fall, and I was shocked at where we had employees working. It was deplorable at best. But I will say, even with the overage, that did come back to the appropriate channels and was approved to go over. But it was very much needed. It was not good working conditions for our employees.
Thank you, Ann. We agree. The Kuntz parking lot, 150 grand, was bid out and had some nice savings over what was expected. We'll also get some LED fixtures, will save us into the future on our lighting costs. So the Musco lighting, which is off to the left, you can see what it looked like before and what it looks like now. We're just hearing rave reviews for the transparency of the luminescence of the pool. You couple that with the item you're going to see in a second in terms of the wall decor and the carpeting that was at the end of the pool. All those are being upgraded, and I think it's really bringing Beardsley into a nicer light. HVACs, many of you know we have over 250 of them. Relatively modest number were proposed in the current year. I believe it was the 9 HVAC units, and we're coming in right at budget on those. The golf carts were proposed at 20. This has had some supply chain, and the price of them did escalate on July 1, and so had a slight excess there, and due to that. And this is what I was just talking about, not only on price, but you can see this is what the end of the pool here is what was been removed, and the walls along here all throughout are going to be done. But what was interesting is that there was proposed, I think, to remove the terrazzo facing, but instead of removing it and at that considerable cost, a revamp of it was done in a restoration, and it's saved us considerable dollars. Once again, Carl does this all the time, but he's always looking out to try and bring value engineering to bear. So those were the dollar values, or excuse me, the statuses of our budgets, and for the most part, I think we managed it very well. I give Carl and Todd all the credit on that, so. And many others. So.
I believe it was Kathy who had requested this, and I appreciate that. I think this is something that we need to continue to do every year, and that was a great idea you had, Kathy. Thank you.
Great job.
Thank you.
Great job.
Any other comments, questions for Pete on the capital for this year? Okay, thank you very much. I do want to remind all of you that I would appreciate committee evaluations. They are available online. I was able to convince the powers that be that my committee would actually fill out evaluations instead of having another meeting to evaluate. And so you owe me one. I would appreciate you filling out the online evaluations. They will be helpful for next year's committee chair, and we do want to continue to operate our committees as best we can and best serving our community and our members. I do want to suggest too that if you're interested in serving in the future, please let Dick know. He will be the Budget and Finance Chair for next year, or fill out an online application if there's another committee you're interested in being on. It's the members of our community who make this thing work. It's not the governing board as much as it is the committees and what they do. I'm not making light of the governing board because our president is here and I know how hard she works, but it is the committees who have lots and lots of input, and all those community members who come to the meetings. So at this time, I would like to entertain any committee comments that have.
And before we go to that, one of the things is that because we've seen the operational capital budget, again, could we, as a committee, make sure that there's consensus that it goes as presented to the governing board? Just to make sure that we're all in agreement on that?
I think that would be a good idea. Do we have consensus that it move forward as it is? If not, speak up, please.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, George, for that suggestion. Do I have any committee comments at this point in time? I'll start, Gary.
Do you know if we have submitted, I've submitted my review. Do you know if we Have you gotten it or not? Do you know if it's,
Those
does
all
that come
go
at
to
the
our
end?
executive
Oh, okay.
assistant, so, and I will not get them since I will not be chair next year.
Okay, so Dick will
But
get
I
it.
would say if you submitted it, it's in. Thank you.
Karen. Just a comment, I know this is our last meeting, so at least mine last meeting, yours too, I think. The thing that differentiates this from other committees that I've served on, which has been 6, this is my 6th one, 4 of them no longer exist, so I guess that tells you something about me.
That in the notes.
Yeah, please. But to me, this group has an intellectual curiosity that you don't see on other committees. And most people that I've experienced come to committees with a personal interest, not so much on issues, even though there are some of those, but they just want to know more about what's going on. And that being the case, go to Torch, not sit on a committee. But if you're on a committee, you're expected to participate. And that's what I think we have. And we participate in not only a healthy and respectful way, but with an idea that we're trying to add value to the conversation of whatever we're talking about. One of the advantages we have is working with Pete and Cliff and Terry. I mean, you couldn't find a better trio. And we're very fortunate as a committee to have that kind of support, so it makes our jobs a lot easier. But I want you to know I've respected each of your opinions and working with you this past year. And I look forward to being on Dick's committee next year. We've already talked. But I just think the community owes you all a debt of gratitude for your participation. Thanks.
Thank you, Gary. And to touch on what you said about this being our last meeting, this may be our last meeting. I will wait and see if anything comes out of our board meeting at the end of May. It will be a week from Friday, May 26th. I anticipate we will not meet in June, but I have not officially canceled our meeting. So if anyone is not going to be available in June, please send it to me in writing because I'll forget it. So
I'll be available on phone.
So, and yes, and let me know if you need to be available by remote, if we would have a meeting. Thank you. Kat?
Yes, I want to thank you, Ann, because I think you've done a stellar job and in managing the issues and the conversations and the discussions. You've been top-notch in that, and want to thank you. And Gary, you may be coming back. Maybe I'll be coming back. But this committee's been a good committee. I like the idea that we delve down into some tough conversations and issues. I think that's a good thing. And we've learned a lot over this past year, and I want to thank you for your outstanding leadership. Thank you.
Actually, I want to do the same. Ann, you've provided some incredible leadership, and I really appreciate this. I've only been on this committee about 6 months, but I've been very, very impressed with it. I think Gary said it very well. I think that it's a very committee that is not afraid to ask tough questions, and they do it with the right spirit that for information, so they can process it and make what they believe is the best decision for our community. So I look forward to next year's BNF committee, and I'm honored to have the privilege to chair that. Thank you.
Thank you. John?
My comments would be redundant. I just agree with everything that's been said so far. Thank you.
Well, I want to recognize you. I've dealt with a lot of executives, but you're one of the best. You've done a very good job. I think that it's been a privilege working with you. I'll probably apply for the committee for next year. It's been a good committee. We're able to have hard discussions and yet remain polite. I wish the rest of our political structure had the same, congeniality. And I congratulate you and wish you luck in your next endeavor over there.
And there are no words that can describe how lucky we are to have you as chair of this committee. Your foresight and your perseverance on tough issues have been second to none. And I want to thank each one of the members on this committee for the support they give the community on that one, because it's important. The other comment that I'd love to think is to touch what Cliff was talking about when we talk about our transparency. I have yet to see any other community that has 12 open forums for discussion and talking about the budget day in and day out. And do we all like some things that go on? No. But the opportunity is there to not only have a voice in it, but to ask the questions about it, of not just how come you're doing this, but why and where does the thought process is. And that speaks highly, like Gary has said, and I don't think anybody, we should put that in writing, Gary, about how we are well managed. And I appreciate that. And I do thank you for your service.
Thanks to all of you, and anybody who comes back on the committee next year, I should forewarn you that I've already been asked by next year's governing board president to serve on this committee, so I will be here. But I think one phrase Gary said quite well was, we have an intellectual curiosity, and I think that shows through in this committee, and we don't always agree, but we do know how to be respectful and to disagree without being disagreeable. And we have not had any personal attacks. We have just all been respectful of each other, and I think that says a lot. And of course, working with Pete and Cliff and Terry and ultimately with Bill, I think we've had good answers and support from them too. Do we have any live comments from our audience? We do. President Sue Fitzsimons.
Thank you. I just want to go along with what the other people have said on this committee and let you know that you are absolutely, invaluable resource for the governing board, because you have the expertise, you have the knowledge, and you do delve into things. And to provide for the board that kind of service and your recommendations is really a comfort for board members who may not be that experienced in financial issues and have not had enough time to be able to delve into them as you do in depth that you have done in this committee. And so I would say you are one of the very, very most helpful committees, and your expertise is absolutely invaluable for assisting us with at the governing board level. So thank you very much, and I hope a lot of you hang on for next year and continue to provide that. And I too feel that you work really well with the staff, and I think that's so important. So thank you very much.
Thank you for your comments. Have we had any remote listeners, or do they have any comments for us? Don't hear of any others. As I said, our next meeting dates are scheduled for June 7th and June 21st. Those are currently listed as possible, but I will let you know as soon as I can, and you just let me know your availability for June. I do not believe we will have both of them, but maybe not either one. But thanks again to all of you for the time you've given, not just your time here at our meetings, but I know it takes time to study the information before you get to a meeting, because you all have come armed with your questions, and you've drilled down and you've done calculations, and that's great. That's what we need to have from our committee members, asking the tough questions and supporting our community. So thank you very much. With that, we are adjourned at 10:34. Thank you very much.